So I now know that this isn't the case, but when I was asked to speak about the difficulties of growing up in an age of immaturity, I suspected that many people wanted me to talk about someone who is both the most powerful and least mature person on the planet. A recent American podcast called him an 8-year-old with an Uzi. And since Donald Trump took office in 2017, American commentators have amused themselves with descriptions that refer to different possible ages. So sometimes he's throwing tantrums like a 2-year-old, sometimes he's a particularly nasty 16-year-old boy. But this is not my subject today for two reasons. The first is that I think those comparisons are an insult to every child in the world. Having raised three of them, myself, I know that children are not angelic, but no child I know should be compared to the man in the White House. The second reason was given by my friend, the Turkish writer Ece Temukaran, who says that any country experiencing the path to dictatorship begins by calling the would-be dictator a child. It's a way of making him seem comic instead of dangerous, of psychologizing him instead of understanding the political forces at stake. I am currently working on a short book about what I regret to say we will have to call the Trump era. And I think the problem with the man is not that he's not grown up, it's that he's evil. So let me forget for a moment about the elephant in everybody's room all over the world, and turn to the subject about which I was asked to speak. How our culture makes it hard to grow up by constantly portraying adulthood as a sad, dull business. The banalities we use seem harmless. The compliment you make by telling a friend that he or she looks younger than they are. The acquaintance who praises you for remaining young at heart. The message they convey, it always seems nice. You're supposed to say thank you. But the message they convey is pernicious and pervasive. The best years of our lives are those under 30. And in the years that remain, we should imitate what we imagine to be their virtues. Now, this is what it's supposed to be like. There are masses of cross-cultural empirical studies showing that happiness increases with age. Growing up is viewed with dread, and Peter Pan is a symbol of rebellion. Nor is this surprising when, in a culture where being grown up is seen as a matter of renouncing your hopes and your dreams and resigning yourself to a life that will be less adventurous, significant, and worthwhile than you supposed when you began it. But it's particularly odd to idealize the decade between 18 and 28. Few of us would choose to repeat that decade. Those in it look so fresh and shining that we forget how awful they feel, how uncertain, how frequently torn. Enjoy the best years of your life sounds cheerful, but it contains a sinister message. everything else will be worse. By describing life as a downhill process, we prepare young people to expect and demand very little. I think philosophy can provide a different model of adulthood. I guess it's not possible to change the level of the sound here. It has to be this loud. I'm just getting just a tiny bit. Yeah, it's hard for me to hear myself talk. Just a poco. Thank you. Okay. It's only recently that I began to think about what such apparently harmless banalities do to the very young. When they see us longing to return to the age they long to get over, what can they think about their futures? Each of them knows that our well-meant advice to savor the best years of their lives is a problem because those years are very hard. With little experience and even less self-confidence, they make their first decisions with the conviction that every decision is fateful. This love story, this course of study, this job will forever determine the course of their lives. Add to this the pressure that they are failing at savoring, for they're told their lives will only get harder, and you have a recipe for misery that marks the third decade of life. They know how uncertain they are. Where the culture continually tells them this is the best it will ever get, what hopes can they have? Given how few people who actually remember their 20s would choose to repeat them, and given that a variety of cross-cultural studies show that people generally get happier as they get older, the point of the false message can only be political in the very broadest sense. By describing the hardest decade of our lives as the best one, we prepare young people to expect very little of the world and demand even less. Our worship of youth hurts all of us, for it primes us to view life itself as a slow side downhill. This is the standpoint of something known as Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man. You needn't be a Shakespeare scholar to have heard the speech from which it was taken, but remarkably, most Shakespeare scholars call it that too. You've heard all the world's a stage and everyone's playing a part. It's eloquent. It's Shakespeare, after all. It better be eloquent. But the message is horrible. All the world's a stage, which means the men and women on it are merely playing roles that have all been written beforehand. They're not free to choose. Babies are not wondrous. They're not even cute. They mule and puke in the nurse's arms. Lovers are not passionate or poetic. They sigh like a furnace, belching woeful drivel. I'm quoting here. And so on it continues to the last scene of second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans everything. The message, put in American English, is life sucks and then you die. Now, most every contemporary study of human development refers to Shakespeare's 7 Ages, although publications like Psychology Today try to soften the blows by urging its readers to go to the gym and take advantage of modern dentists. The references are so broad. I mean, everything that you read about human development refers to this, that I decided to go back and read the play from which it comes, As You Like It, because I couldn't remember the context. But I didn't expect to be surprised by it. The speech is made by Jacques, a courtier who describes himself as being so melancholy that he says, I can suck melancholy out of a song the way a weasel sucks eggs. Jacques' melancholy is so extreme that none of the other characters in the play take him seriously. His speech is a comedy, and it gives us about as much insight into Shakespeare's view of life as Lady Macbeth's speeches tell us about Shakespeare's view of morality. Shakespeare's scholars make the same mistake. Just look at the panels in the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, or the fact that in 1896, a group of Shakespeare lovers raised money to install stained glass windows on the theme in the Stratford Church, where Shakespeare is buried. Since he was as good at writing comedy as he was at writing tragedy, it's as easy to imagine him turning in his grave with laughter as with tears. I bring this example, and I'll bring another one in a few minutes, to show how thoroughly we collude in our own undoing. We misread Shakespeare to give the gloomiest possible picture of human existence an air of authority. It's Shakespeare, after all. Who can argue with Shakespeare, right? This may be partly a matter of psychic insurance. Optimists, after all, can always be disappointed, while pessimists can only be pleasantly surprised. But I think something deeper is going on here. A growing and extensive body of work in anthropology suggests that nostalgia for childhood is really confined to a very small percentage of the world's population. Those of us who were raised in cultures that can be called weird, as in Western, educated, industrial, rich democracies. Okay. David Lancy, whose book, The Anthropology of Childhood, I strongly recommend, shows that most of what we assume about growing up is confined to cultures he describes as neontocracies, those that place children at the top of a pyramid of value and adults at the bottom. Most of the world, by contrast, consists of gerontocracies, in which the older you get, the more resources and attention you receive. They view children at best as desirable but pragmatically commodified chattel. Infants are not yet considered fully human, often kept swaddled or even hidden. They are nursed longer than our children. In one tribe in Papua New Guinea, for example, they aren't weaned until about the age of 3, the age at which children are able to tell their dreams. Okay? Nor does the intense, purposeful interaction between older children and adults we think is necessary occur in village societies. Their children learn what they need to master their culture by watching what older people do, be it catching fish, pounding grain, or performing rituals. Nowhere in the entire ethnographic record of childhood, wrote Lancy, have I found any instance of a parent and a child building a block tower together, or anything else whose purpose is to entertain while instructing a child. What does seem to be biologically based is a child's strong desire to be active, competent, and valued by a community. In traditional cultures, children do this by making themselves useful. And whether their labor is exploited or merely taken for granted by their families, one thing is certain: those who grew up in such cultures don't get nostalgic when they speak of their childhood. Let's see. Until pretty recently, this was true of Europeans too. Descartes thought the main reason for human unhappiness is that we begin our lives as children. And aside from an occasional fond word for his mother, no classical author from Greece to China left a record of his childhood as golden or expressed particular nostalgia for it. Since the rate of infant mortality imploded and we began having fewer children and paying more attention to the ones we have, many would say too much attention. But let's recall what non weird cultures are missing, namely, most forms of choice. The parts on their stage allow for little variation, and the roles are largely fixed in advance. Members of village societies take the lives that are laid out for them. What they don't do, with few exceptions, is to ask the question, what should I do with all this freedom? A whole life in front of me laid out at my feet, as Simone de Beauvoir put it. The question arose in the Enlightenment, for it was the Enlightenment that broke with the idea that your freedom will be no greater than your father's. Only with the Enlightenment did the question of choosing a life path arise. There's no question that the problems of growing up are structural, but they're certainly getting harder. If weird cultures have been the exception, it's sad but safe to say in another couple of decades that Apple and Facebook and Google, Meta and Google and some corporation we have yet to imagine will ensure that the rest of the world follows the Western model. But let's look at its roots. I'm going to turn to one of my favorite dead white men. The other one is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is Immanuel Kant. It's no accident that the problem of growing up was central for both of them. They came of age in a world that was just beginning to allow that your choices might be different from your parents'. Though it would be hard to find two more different characters, they shared something very important. Both came from barely educated families of small craftsmen. Rousseau's father made watches, Kant's father made saddles, and it's quite certain that neither fathers ever imagined the lives their sons turned out to lead. I won't talk about Rousseau today except to say that those who find him mad or maddening should be pulled up short by the role he played in Kant's life, which otherwise appeared to be so boring that Heinrich Heine wrote that Kant's life was easy to describe since he had neither a life nor a history. But Kant wrote that Rousseau changed his life and called him the Newton of the mind, the greatest compliment the 18th century could bestow. Let's look at Kant's most famous essay, What is Enlightenment?, which sent generations of German high school students to sleep. If you only remember one line Kant wrote, it's likely to be the first sentence of What is Enlightenment? Sapere aude. Enlightenment is humankind's exit from its self-incurred immaturity. Okay? The fact that the essay is more readable than his scholarly text makes it all the more puzzling that few people bother to read more than the first few sentences. Like Jacques' speech in As You Like It, the essay's fame has done nothing to ensure that it's properly read. Kant tells us that our immaturity is our fault because its cause is a lack of courage, not ignorance or stupidity, but laziness and cowardice keep us from thinking for ourselves. It's so easy to be immature. It's so comfortable to let others make decisions for us. And he's right, of course. Even the most independently minded of us will sometimes agree with his claim. I have no need to think if only I can pay. Others will take over the tiresome business for me. It is often our own fault. We're willing to we're unwilling to summon the energy or run the risks that thinking for ourselves would demand. And it's easy to see that why this is a message that teachers emphasize when they teach the text in high schools. Surely we don't want the young to think anything's wrong with the society that a little hard work and effort on their part can't fix. So the message of what is enlightenment becomes a neoliberal mantra that strengthened existing orders. Any dissatisfaction you may feel with the world around you is your fault. If only you could get rid of your own laziness and cowardice, you could be enlightened, grown up, and free. Okay? So it's kind of no wonder of a certain age that Germans of a certain age who had to memorize the essay in school roll their eyes when they hear the phrase Selbstverschuldete Unmündigkeit, which means self-incurred immaturity, okay? But as with Jacques' speech in As You Like It, most people remember the line and forget its context. For Kant is not preaching neoliberalism. He does not think your dissatisfaction is your fault alone. You may tend, as I do sometimes, to laziness and cowardice, but Kant says those tendencies are abused. There are guardians who have kindly taken over the task of supervising the rest of us by turning us into dumb domestic animals. That's Kant's phrase. The rulers want us to be dumb domestic animals, and convincing us that independent thinking is not only difficult, but dangerous. And this is a radical and powerful political message. The state has an interest in preventing us from growing up, and it cultivates and exploits our worst tendencies in order to do so, for grown-up citizens are more trouble than they're worth. The state's desire for control and our own desire for comfort combine to create societies with fewer conflicts, but they are not societies of grown-ups. Now, which guardians did Kant have in mind? The interesting thing is, I wrote this. I mean, I wrote a book on which this essay is based several years ago, but I wrote this essay maybe a month ago, and I was thinking that Kant's guardians had little relevance to us because he was thinking about feudal governments where even enlightened rulers were paternalistic. It's easy to see how feudal structures kept their citizens infantilized, in particular by straightforward censorship, which I honestly did not think I would have to be discussing today about the United States of America, okay? But I don't think that straightforward censorship, as much as it's now been introduced in the United States, is a complete description of how Western democracies work. Fortunately, European countries haven't introduced it yet. So the question is, how does a modern democracy keep us infantilized? Okay. Now, think about what it means to take care of an infant. It's exhausting, but it's not conceptually hard. A baby who has just learned that she can act on the world by coordinating hand and eye to grasp an object might grasp the wrong thing, okay? You know, it's an achievement, hand-eye coordination, taking her mother's glasses or earrings or whatever it is, a knife that was left on the table. But it's very easy to distract her. All you need to do is put something else in her way. A bunch of keys works wonders until babies are, 7 or 8 months old. And the baby is distracted, instantly forgetting what was on her mind before. Now, as she grows, distraction gets more difficult, but the principle remains the same. You have wheeled your 3-year-old through the grocery store, telling her that food can't be eaten before it's paid for, that some things are better to choose than others, that the packages they're wrapped in often hide more than they conceal, and generally done your best to introduce her to the complex web of social interaction required to obtain nourishment in a 21st century city. Finally, you reach the checkout line where she lights upon brightly gleaming packs of nutritional garbage, whole rows of them, placed precisely at the eye level of a child in a cart whose capacity for delayed gratification has just been sorely tested for half an hour. I think the industrial psychologist, and be sure it was designed by an industrial psychologist, deserves a special place in hell. Now, how do you distract your child then? Well, different things work on different days. Sometimes a firm no and a reminder that you're about to go to the playground. Sometimes a banana and a revision of the lesson that things have to be paid for before they're consumed. On really bad days, you might throw a little tantrum yourself or give in and buy the candy. What's important is that distraction is necessary for all but the most authoritarian parents who have no qualms about hitting a child who insists on something they don't want to give her. Okay. Now, there's a child, yeah. Now, distracting older people from objects of desire is slightly more complicated, but whatever difficulty there may be is compensated by the fact that the things that can be used to distract us is nearly limitless, and I suspect since the invention of cyberspace, literally limitless. For the record, my children say I can't possibly understand the abysmal nature of contemporary culture since I don't really use social media. But I want to tell you about something that distracted millions of people in August, even if they weren't using social media, okay? Now, I want to begin by talking about what was going on in the week that began on July 28th. This is only some of what was really happening. Trump fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief because he didn't like his report, which was true, of course, but he didn't like the job numbers. The Senate appointed Jeanine Pirro, who became famous as a reality TV star, Judge Jeanine, on Fox News, to be the chief public prosecutor for Washington, D.C. A couple of things I'll leave out. The Trump administration subjected Brazilian judge Alexandre de Moraes to sanctions normally reserved for human rights abuses because of his rulings against Trump's ally, Bolsonaro. The U.S. Attorney General, Chief Prosecutor, announced an investigation designed to target Barack Obama. Trump announced plans to add a $200 million 90,000 square feet ballroom in the east wing of the White House, which should be larger than the White House itself. This is all in 1 week, and I didn't tell you everything. And finally, what happened in that week? Um, yeah, a new barrage of reports confirming the famine in Gaza. Okay. Now, it's true that the second Trump administration's method has been, in the words of Steve Bannon, to flood the zone with shit. That is, to do so many outrageous things at once, often every day, that people have no time even to grasp them, much less oppose them. But in that particular week, US news and eventually some international news was dominated by the advertisement starring the actress Sydney Sweeney, a blonde young woman who looks like she'd fit right into the Mar-a-Lago style. The ad showed Sweeney in tight blue jeans, a half-button shirt, seductively teasing the audience to buy the pants. As a caption read, Sydney Sweeney has great genes, playing on the fact that jeans and jeans sound alike in English. Okay. Now, some of the woke who consider themselves left, I don't, but that's another book I wrote, launched an outraged campaign that claimed the ad supported eugenics, a pseudoscience which began in the late 19th century and sought to change the genetic makeup of the human population through various measures. Since Nazis and other racists were in favor of it, it became known as a racist movement, though the people who were outraged by the ad might be surprised to know that W.B. Du Bois was one of its earlier defenders. But the woke said the ad, the actress, and the clothing company were white supremacists or even Nazis. Trump eventually weighed in when it emerged that Sweeney was, in fact, a Republican voter, posting, "If she's Republican, I like her ad." If you want to waste your time, you can find the whole controversy on the internet. Now, while millions of people were doing so, real strides to establish full-on fascism were being made in the real world, as I detailed in the examples that I just mentioned. And they're probably not even all we should have been paying attention to. And I confess it myself, when I wanted to write about the conflict in an essay about woke a few weeks later, I couldn't remember all the things that had happened that week. And I had to ask my assistant. I spent hours every day reading various sources of news, but I had spent some of those hours watching and reading about Sydney Sweeney myself. Okay? Easier to remember as all of the shit that was flooding the zone. Okay. But other things that distract me just plenty without the news or what passes for it. My computer had been sputtering, as it's programmed to do, shortly after the guarantee runs out, and I finally ordered a replacement. But new features have been added or changed in the name of improvement, and things that I had learned to do without reflection all had to be unlearned. If you added up all the hours we spend on what are cheerfully called upgrades, figuring out how to set the new alarm clock, grill with the new oven, store messages on the new smartphone, save pictures on the new camera, wouldn't it be enough hours to produce enough food to feed the world's hungry children or maybe find a cure for cancer? Given all the forces arrayed against it, no, is that? Yeah. No wonder Kant thought growing up to be more a matter of courage than knowledge. All the information in the world is no substitute for the guts to use your own judgment. Okay? Um, Courage is required to live with the rift that will run through all our lives, however good they may be. Ideals of reason tell us how the world should be. Experience tells us that it rarely is. Growing up requires confronting the gap between how the world is and how the world should be without giving up on either one. And now I'm going to tell my translator that I decided to cut some of this, hoping to leave some time for questions. Um, okay. So let me see, where am I here? Kant. That's Kant's house, by the way. Okay. Um, Contemporary mechanisms to keep us infantilized range from the growing practice of keeping us all under electronic surveillance, or the industry's ability to keep us dazzled by a bewildering number of choices of smartphones or breakfast cereal, by keeping the important choices out of our hands. We are kept dazzled by a wealth of small decisions which distract us from remembering that the important decisions are made by people we cannot even name. Or did you choose a world in which oil companies profit from wrecking the planet? Children die easily of preventable diseases or are collaterally damaged by drones. Do your choices make any difference to any of those? Totalitarian regimes are seldom necessary and usually counterproductive. For wherever the mechanisms of control are clearly present, some bold souls will be moved to contest them. Simpler and subtler are the infantilizing processes of non totalitarian societies that encourage our national laziness by giving us comfort through a range of toys. Of course, neither smartphones nor cars are described as toys, they're portrayed as tools that every adult needs. By contrast, the ideas of a more just and humane world are portrayed as childish dreams, which we should discard in favor of the real business of acquiring toys. That is, finding a steady job that fixes our place in the consumer economy. It's a reversal that leaves us constantly confused. Now, Peter Pan, the magical boy who refused to grow up, has been a role model for over 100 years, not just for cases like Michael Jackson, who built Neverland, but for some of the people I most cherish. And for those who view him as a hero, Peter Pan is a symbol of rebellion against a society so burdened it no longer knows how to live. When we're surrounded by voices that urge us to play the parts that have already been written for us, Peter Pan seems like a rejection of resignation. But what if we've got it exactly backwards? Okay. What if we live in a culture that really doesn't want grown ups? For self obsessed, childish citizens are easier to manage. This was Kant's claim in What is Enlightenment? And if that's true, what better way, and I think it is, what better way to keep people in self incurred immaturity than to present such a dismal vision of adulthood that no one with soul and spirit could possibly want to grow up? Then it isn't Peter Pan's rebellion that's genuinely subversive, but on the contrary, the decision to embrace growing up with all the freedom and self determination it implies. Now, I'm not suggesting that the author of Peter Pan was consciously trying to turn the tables at the beginning of the last century. As I've tried to show with the misreading of Shakespeare, we're very ready to collude in our own downfall. Shame, disappointment, and a false commitment to stoicism all combine to convince us that resignation to reality is the mark of adulthood. And I've argued, on the contrary, that being grown up means being able to face the split between the world as it is and the world as it should be, that Nietzsche called the metaphysical wound in the heart of the universe, without ever giving up on the claims each one makes on us. This stance is so precarious that it requires a permanent struggle for balance, and as such is just the opposite of the stasis for which adulthood is known. Okay, I'm going to skip a bit. I'm going to skip a whole rather interesting discussion on plant obsolescence. If anyone is interested in hearing about how the economy actually works in brainwashing us, you can read it in the book, okay? As both as producers and consumers, we are preoccupied with toys, while truly adult questions, who runs the world and what are the mechanisms by which we could change it, are dismissed as naive. And in a very rare private disclosure, Steve Jobs, the inventor of most of Apple, said the question of which dishwasher to buy dominated discussion at his family dinner table for weeks. And he offered this as a good example of how to teach children democratic deliberation. I would be glad if he devoted similar attention to the question of labor conditions in apple plants in China, which are horrendous. Okay, so here's here's another question. Why are $1.7 trillion available every year for military spending, but funds for food, medicine, and education not available? Ask a question like that, and you're likely to be treated like the child in The Emperor's New Clothes. Everyone knows it and doesn't want to acknowledge it. Those who insist on it should feel ashamed for stating the obvious. Now, Malala became the youngest person in the world to win the Nobel Prize when she fought for girls' rights to be educated. After getting that education at Oxford, she used it, among other things, to calculate that we could provide 12 years of education to every child on the planet at the cost, get this, of 8 days of profits made by arms companies every year. Okay? And I hope that some of you who are clapping will remember that and bring it up, because when I read that, I happened to be going to a conference where I knew that a Nobel laureate on economics was also going to be there. And I asked him if it could possibly be true. And he took out a napkin and a pencil and he drew some figures and he said, yeah, it looks about right. So it's an appalling fact, and I repeat it whenever I can, but I have no idea of what levers of power could be moved in order to do something about it. So please pass it around, think about solutions. Okay? Now, I've been asked several times whether the problems with growing up aren't a result of the 60s. More recently in England, a listener asked whether the problems I've been describing are the problems of baby boomer ressentiment. Since I'm a baby boomer myself, I think it's time not to blame our generation for everything. There are a number of answers to that. One is that the glorification of youth did not begin in the 60s, but at the turn of the last century with Peter Pan. But most importantly, the 60s were a rebellion against the idea that our lives must be determined by patterns and structures we do not control. And finally, I've been asked if the fear of growing up is just the fear of growing old, and that fear is nothing but the fear of death. My sense is that people in their 20s think more about death than those in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. The closer we get to it, the less inclined we are to waste the time we've got left reflecting on death as an existential problem. I'm not going to comment on this. Oscar Wilde says some nice things in Dorian Gray, but we much prefer the life that makes our souls to the unmarred bodies of our youth. Once again, remember Jacques' view of the life cycle, which is so very much not Shakespeare's view, that he follows Jacques' view with the entrance of another character, Adam, who says, "Though I look old, yet I am strong and lusty." In the end, I believe that fear of growing up is less a fear of dying than a fear of life itself. Do you really believe that the best thing would be to never have been born? Thank you for listening in this very hot room. Ooh. All right.